When they read the will, his children expected millions. Instead, the lawyer said every penny went to the cleaning lady who'd worked in their father's house for 20 years. Their screams of outrage filled the room. But then the lawyer opened a second envelope, and what he read next made them fall silent. This is the story of how greed revealed itself, and why true wealth has nothing to do with money. My name is Elena Morales, and I never imagined I'd be at the center of one of the wealthiest families' biggest scandal. For 20 years, I cleaned the home of Jonathan Hartwell, a real estate magnate worth $47 million. I scrubbed his floors, washed his windows, and prepared simple meals when his cook had days off. I was invisible to most people who visited that mansion, but not to Jonathan. He saw me, really saw me, in ways his own children never did. I came to America from Guatemala when I was 38, leaving behind my mother and 2 sisters to build a better life. I sent money home every month, lived in a tiny apartment, and worked 3 cleaning jobs to survive. When I got hired at the Hartwell mansion, it felt like winning the lottery. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and Mr. Hartwell treated me with respect. That last part was rarer than you'd think. Jonathan was 72 when I started working for him. His wife had died 5 years earlier, and his 3 children, Michael, Patricia, and David, visited occasionally but never stayed long. They lived in penthouses and beach houses, drove expensive cars, and traveled constantly. Jonathan would light up when they called to say they were coming, then deflate when they canceled at the last minute. I watched this pattern repeat for years. The children always had reasons. Michael was too busy with his tech startup in Silicon Valley. Patricia was traveling in Europe with her 3rd husband. David was dealing with important business meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. But they never missed a chance to call when they needed something. Money for investments, bailouts from failed ventures, down payments on new properties. Jonathan gave them everything they asked for, hoping it would somehow translate into more time with them. My relationship with Jonathan started simply. I cleaned, he worked in his study, we barely spoke beyond pleasantries. But over time, something shifted. He began asking about my day, my family back home, my dreams for the future. I told him about my mother's diabetes, how I was saving for her medication. I shared stories about my sisters and their children, whom I'd never met but supported from afar. He listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from previous conversations. Then Jonathan started doing something that confused me. He'd leave extra money in envelopes marked for your mother's medicine or for your niece's school supplies. When I protested, insisting I couldn't accept charity, he'd smile and say it wasn't charity. It was gratitude for someone who showed up consistently, who cared enough to notice when he seemed sad or tired, who asked how he was feeling and actually waited for an answer. We fell into a comfortable routine. I'd arrive at 7 each morning, and he'd have coffee waiting. We'd talk for 20 minutes before I started working. He told me about his late wife, Catherine, how they'd built their fortune together, how empty the mansion felt without her. He shared his disappointment in his children, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. He'd given them everything except the one thing they needed, understanding that relationships require presence, not just presence. I watched Jonathan's health decline over my final 2 years with him. His heart was failing, and doctors said he had maybe 18 months left. His children's visits became even rarer. They'd promise to come for Thanksgiving, then send expensive gift baskets instead. They'd say they'd visit for his birthday, then FaceTime for 5 minutes between meetings. Each broken promise carved deeper lines into Jonathan's face. But I was there, every day, without fail. When he was too weak to walk to the garden he loved, I'd bring flowers to his room. When he couldn't sleep because of pain, I'd sit with him and share stories about my childhood in Guatemala. When he felt forgotten, I reminded him that he mattered, that his life had meaning, that someone saw his worth beyond his bank account. 6 months before he died, Jonathan asked me to sit down in his study. He looked serious, almost nervous. "Elena," he said, "I need to tell you something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you. My fortune, my properties, everything." I was shocked, horrified even. I protested immediately. "Mr. Hartwell," I said, "I can't accept this. Your children deserve their inheritance. This will destroy your family." He smiled sadly and shook his head. "My children," he said, "stopped being family years ago. They became accountants, showing up only to audit my worth and calculate their shares. You've been more family to me in 20 years than they've been in their entire lives. You showed up, Elena, not when it was convenient or profitable, but every single day. You cared about me as a person, not as a wallet. That's worth more than they'll ever understand." I begged him to reconsider, but he was firm. The will was changed. He made me promise not to tell anyone until after he passed. Those final 6 months, I carried that secret like a stone in my chest, dreading the moment when his children would find out. Jonathan died on a Tuesday morning in October, with me holding his hand. His children arrived within hours of getting the news, not to grieve but to begin organizing the estate. They were polite to me, barely treating me as part of the furniture to be sorted and dismissed. The funeral was elaborate and expensive, filled with business associates and society people. Michael, Patricia, and David played their parts perfectly, accepting condolences with practiced sadness. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. I didn't want to attend, but Jonathan's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, insisted I be there. I sat in the corner of the conference room while his children occupied the prominent chairs, already discussing how they'd divide the properties and investments. They didn't acknowledge me at all. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading. The initial provisions were standard, small bequests to charities and distant relatives. Then he reached the main clause. To Elena Morales, my trusted companion and friend for 20 years, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $47 million. The room exploded. Michael jumped from his chair, face purple with rage. Patricia screamed that it was impossible, illegal, the result of manipulation. David started threatening lawsuits before Harrison had even finished the sentence. Their true natures, hidden behind polite society masks, came roaring out. They hurled accusations at me, words I won't repeat, calling me every horrible name imaginable. I sat frozen, tears streaming down my face, wishing I could disappear. Then Harrison held up his hand for silence. There's more, he said. A letter to be read aloud to explain Jonathan's decision. The room fell quiet, though hatred still burned in their eyes. Harrison began reading Jonathan's words. To my children, Michael, Patricia, and David. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you're likely furious about my decision. Before you destroy Elena with your rage, I need you to understand why I made this choice. Over the past 20 years, Elena visited me 7,300 days. She was present for every birthday, every holiday, every difficult night when I couldn't sleep. In those same 20 years, the three of you combined visited me exactly 41 times. The children's faces paled as Harrison continued. Elena never asked me for money, yet she's the only one who truly cared about my well-being. You, my children, called only when you needed funds. Michael, you borrowed $6 million for failed business ventures, money you never repaid. Patricia, your divorce settlements cost me another $4 million. David, your gambling debts required $3 million to settle. In total, I gave you over $20 million during my lifetime. Money you accepted without gratitude while barely giving me your time. Michael started to protest, but Harrison silenced him with a look and kept reading. Elena asked about my day. She noticed when I was in pain. She remembered my wife's favorite flowers and brought them to remind me of happier times. She sat with me when I was lonely, shared meals with me when you couldn't be bothered to visit, and treated me with dignity when you treated me like an ATM machine. I gave you my fortune while I was alive, through your endless requests and demands. Now I'm giving what remains to someone who valued me as a human being, not a bank account. The room was dead silent now. Patricia's perfectly composed face crumbled. David stared at the floor. Michael's hands trembled. Harrison read the final paragraph. Your mother, Catherine, and I raised you with love, but somewhere along the way you learned to value money over relationships. I hope this moment teaches you what you failed to learn in life, that true wealth lies in how we treat others, in presence over presence, in loyalty over luxury. Elena embodied everything I hoped you'd become. That's why she deserves this inheritance. If you ever wonder why your father chose a cleaning lady over his own children, look in the mirror and ask yourselves when you last showed up for anyone except yourselves. Harrison folded the letter and looked at the three adult children with pity. They had nothing to say. The legal language in the will was ironclad. Jonathan had been of sound mind, witnessed by multiple doctors. There was no case for undue influence. Elena had never asked for anything. The inheritance was legally and morally hers. I didn't take pleasure in their pain. I felt sad for them, for Jonathan, for the relationship they'd wasted. I stood up, my voice shaking, and spoke the only words I could manage. Your father loved you until his last breath. He hoped you'd come every single day. This inheritance was never about punishing you. It was about honoring someone who showed him basic human kindness. I'm sorry it came to this. I kept the mansion and turned it into a community center for immigrant families. which is what Jonathan and I had discussed in his final weeks. I set up scholarships for children of domestic workers. I brought my mother and sisters to America and bought a modest home for us to share. I donated generously to causes Jonathan cared about. The money changed my circumstances, but not my character. Sometimes I see updates about Jonathan's children. Michael reinvented himself and now volunteers teaching business skills to underprivileged youth. Patricia wrote a book about reconnecting with what matters. David reconciled with his estranged daughter. Perhaps Jonathan's final lesson finally reached them. I still clean, though I don't need to. I volunteer at the community center, teaching new immigrants about American life. When people learn about the inheritance, they ask if I feel guilty. I tell them honestly, yes, sometimes. But then I remember Jonathan's words. Show up, Elena. Just keep showing up for people. That's the real inheritance he gave me. If this story made you think about what really matters in life, please like and subscribe. Tell us in the comments who showed up for you when it mattered most. Let's celebrate the people who value relationships over riches. Share your gratitude below.